in the women's eyes. This place hadn't been touched by the Inquisitors, but villages just to the east of here had suffered. After that, she and Aiden had kept the songs and stories funny or romantic, things that would lift the spirit or nurture the heart. Since nothing she could send tonight would lift the spirit, she kept her gift to herself. But withholding it made her sad, and she wondered if a story filled with tears was better than no story at all. She shook off the feeling when she heard the footsteps outside the room's door. By the time the door opened, she'd worked on presenting a smile of greeting. That smile faded when the black-haired, blue-eyed man stepped into the room. His harp case was slung over his shoulder by one of its straps. In his hands he held a steaming mug and a small plate containing 2 slices of buttered bread and a piece of cake. "I thought you might like a cup of tea and a bit of a nibble," Aiden said, pushing the door closed with his foot, before taking the couple of steps that brought him close enough to the bed to hand over his offering. He looked tired, Lyra thought, as she accepted the cup and plate. Well, they were both tired, and she'd been traveling with him only for the past few weeks, ever since he'd come back to Brightwood to find out why she hadn't met him as planned. But he'd been traveling since last summer, singing songs in the human villages to warn people about the Blackcoats, the Inquisitors, and traveling up the shining roads to tell the Fey clans that the witches who lived in the old places were the descendants of the House of Gaian, and their deaths by the Inquisitors' hands were the reason pieces of Tir Alainn were disappearing. It was physically wearing to stay in the human world and travel from place to place day after day, singing the songs and telling the stories. It was emotionally wearing to pass through the veil that separated the human world from Tir Alainn to visit the Fey clans and see the stubborn faces and hear the dismissive remarks when she and Aiden tried to tell them the witches needed the Fey's protection. "Drink your tea while it's still warm," Aiden said. He bolted the door, then crossed the small room to carefully set his harp beside the table and 2 chairs placed beneath the window. He undressed with his back to her, leaving his shirt on until he got into bed beside her and was covered below the waist. Disturbed by this new modesty of his, Lyra sipped her tea and ate a slice of buttered bread. They had been lovers on and off for several years, whenever they were both staying with the same clan in Tir Alainn, and during the times when they'd made brief journeys together in Sylvalan. Then he'd been brash, arrogant, sure of his welcome as a lover, and he hadn't thought twice about undressing in front of her. She handed him the cup to share the tea, and insisted he have the other slice of bread and half the cake. She was hungry enough to eat it all, but so was he, despite a hearty dinner they'd been given as part of the fee for their performance. There had been too many lean meals lately. When they finished, she put the cup and plate on the bedside table, next to her brush and the candle she'd lit when she'd come up to the room, and decided it was time to find out what had been preying on his mind lately. It was something more than the loss of another piece of Tir Alainn, something more than the loss of another daughter from the House of Gaian. "Aiden, what's been troubling you these past few days?" He stripped off his shirt, tossed it on one of the chairs, then lay back. He tucked one arm under his head. The other lay across his belly. "What isn't troubling me these days? I've spent almost a year talking and talking and talking, and no one has listened. The old places are still unprotected. The witches are still unprotected. And the Fae sit above it all in Tir Alainn, expecting everything to go on as it has for so long, without making any effort to make sure it does go on. The foul thoughts and feelings the Inquisitors brought with them from Wolfram last year haven't been cleansed from people's hearts and minds. If anything, those thoughts are spreading, slowly seeping into other parts of Sylvalan. Those words are still poisoning men's hearts against the Great Mother, women in general, and the witches in particular." "That's been true for months," Lyra said softly. "But there's more now." "It's nothing." "Yes," she said dryly.